A long time ago, in a place called there lived a man named Abram. He was a good man, honest and kind. Abram was married to a woman named Sarai, and they had lived in for many years. They had family, friends, and a comfortable life. But Abram's heart was different from many around him. While most people worshipped false gods and idols made of wood and stone, Abram believed in the one true God. He had a deep connection with God, even though he had never seen him. One day, something incredible happened. God spoke to Abram. His voice was not loud or frightening, but full of power, love, and wisdom. God told Abram something that would change his life forever. "Leave your country, your family, and your father's house," God said. "Go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you." Abram had never heard such words before. The promise God made was so big, it was hard to even imagine. Abram didn't have children, and he and Sarai were getting older. But God was saying that Abram's family would become a great nation. Abram believed God, though. He knew in his heart that God's words were true, even if he didn't understand how it would all happen. The command God gave was not easy. Abram had to leave everything familiar, his country, his family, and his father's house. He didn't know exactly where he was going. God didn't give him a map or even tell him the name of the land yet. Abram had to trust God step by step. Abram shared the news with Sarai, and she trusted him. Together, they began to prepare for their journey. They packed up their belongings, gathered their animals, and said goodbye to their relatives and friends. Abram also took his nephew, Lot, with him. Lot had lost his father when he was young, and Abram had cared for him like a son. As they set out on their journey, Abram's heart was full of faith. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew who was holding the future, God. They left walking through fields and hills, with only the sky above and the road before them. Day after day, Abram, Sarai, Lot, and their servants traveled. It was not always easy. The sun was hot, and the nights could be cold. They faced challenges, but Abram kept going because he trusted God's promise. He knew that each step brought them closer to the land God had for them. As they journeyed, God guided Abram. One day, they came to a place called Haran, and they stopped there for a time. Haran was a good place to rest, and they stayed for a while. But Abram never forgot God's command. He knew they couldn't stay in Haran forever because God had promised them a land of their own. When the time was right, God spoke to Abram again. "Go to the land I will show you," God reminded him. So Abram and his family packed up again and continued their journey. After many days of traveling, they finally reached the land of Canaan. This was the land God had promised to Abram. As Abram walked through Canaan, God appeared to him once more and said, "To your offspring, I will give this land." Abram was filled with awe and gratitude. Even though he didn't have children yet, God was promising that his descendants would one day live in this land. It was a beautiful place, full of green pastures and fertile soil. Abram knew that God was faithful and that he would keep his promise. In response to God's promise, Abram did something important. He built an altar to the Lord. An altar was a special place where people would worship and thank God. It was a way of showing that he trusted God and believed in his promises. Abram didn't just want to take the land for himself, he wanted to honor God, who had led him every step of the way. Building the altar was a sign of Abram's faith. Even though he still didn't have children, he trusted that God would fulfill his word. And so, Abram worshipped God, thanking him for his guidance, his blessings, and his promises. After building the altar, Abram continued to travel through the land. He moved his tents from place to place, and everywhere he went, he built altars to God. Abram made sure to keep God at the center of his life, even when the future was uncertain. But life in Canaan wasn't always easy. A great famine came over the land, and there wasn't enough food for Abram and his family. Abram had to make a difficult decision. He decided to go down to Egypt for a time, where there was food. Even though God had promised him Canaan, Abram had to trust that God would guide him through this hard time as well. In Egypt, Abram faced new challenges. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, took an interest in Sarai because of her beauty. Abram was afraid that Pharaoh might harm him to take Sarai, so he told her to say that she was his sister. Pharaoh did take Sarai into his palace, but God protected her. God sent terrible plagues on Pharaoh's household because of Sarai, and Pharaoh soon realized that Sarai was Abram's wife. He called Abram and asked him why he hadn't told the truth. Abram explained his fear, and Pharaoh let them leave Egypt unharmed. They returned to Canaan, where Abram continued to trust in God's promise. Even though the famine had been difficult, Abram saw that God had protected him and Sarai through it all. As time passed, Abram and Lot's households grew very large. They had many animals, servants, and tents. Soon, there wasn't enough land for both of them to live in the same place. Their herdsmen began to argue, and Abram knew they had to separate. Being a wise and generous man, Abram gave Lot the first choice of land. Lot chose the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley, near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram, however, stayed in the land of Canaan. After Lot left, God spoke to Abram again. God told him to look around in every direction, north, south, east, and west. All the land you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever, God said. I will make your descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth. If anyone could count the dust, then your descendants could be counted. Once again, God was reminding Abram of his promise. Even though Abram and Sarai still had no children, God was assuring Abram that his descendants would one day fill the land. Abram moved his tents to a place called Hebron, and once again, he built an altar to the Lord. Years went by, and Abram continued to trust God, even though he and Sarai were getting older. Abram was now 99 years old, and Sarai was 90. It seemed impossible that they could ever have children, but Abram knew that nothing was impossible for God. One day, God appeared to Abram again. This time, God made a new covenant with him. A covenant is a special promise that cannot be broken. God told Abram that he would be the father of many nations. In fact, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of many. God also changed Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. God was showing that his promise was still true, and that a great nation would come from them. God told Abraham that Sarah would give birth to a son. Abraham was amazed. He even laughed, thinking about how old they were. But God told him that nothing was too hard for the Lord. God said they would name their son Isaac, which means laughter, because Abraham had laughed in joy at the promise. And just as God said, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. Abraham and Sarah were filled with joy. They named him Isaac, and he was the fulfillment of God's promise. Through Isaac, the family of Abraham would grow, and one day, a great nation would come from him. This nation would be the people of Israel, and from this family line, Jesus would be born, the one through whom all the families of the earth would be blessed, just as God had promised. Abraham's journey wasn't easy, but he trusted God every step of the way. He left his home, followed God's leading, and believed in the promise even when it seemed impossible. Through Abraham's faith, God began his great plan to bless the whole world. Abraham's story is a reminder that when we trust God, even when we don't understand, God will guide us and fulfill his promises. Like Abraham, we are called to walk by faith, knowing that God is always faithful. Abraham was a righteous man, chosen by God to be the father of many nations. Abraham lived in a tent near the great trees of Mamre, along with his wife Sarah. One day, as he sat at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day, 3 men appeared before him. These were no ordinary men, but messengers from the Lord. Abraham, recognizing their divine nature, bowed low to the ground and eagerly welcomed them. He offered them water to wash their feet and urged Sarah to prepare a meal for their honored guests. As they ate, the men delivered a prophecy: Sarah would soon bear a son, despite her advanced age. Sarah laughed at this notion, but the men assured her that nothing was too hard for the Lord. After delivering this joyful news, the men set out towards the city of Sodom. Abraham, sensing the gravity of their mission, walked with them to see them off. As they looked toward Sodom, the Lord revealed to Abraham his intention to investigate the city, for the outcry against it was great and its sin exceedingly grievous. Abraham, concerned for the righteous who might dwell in Sodom, approached the Lord with a humble but bold question: Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? The Lord responded, If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Emboldened, Abraham continued to intercede, gradually reducing the number, from 50 to 45, then to 40, 30, 20, and finally, 10. Each time, the Lord assured Abraham that he would not destroy the city if even 10 righteous people could be found there. After this profound conversation, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his tent. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom in the evening. There, they found Lot, Abraham's nephew, sitting in the gateway of the city. Lot, recognizing their divine nature, insisted that they stay at his house, despite their initial reluctance. He prepared a feast for them and they spent the night under his roof. Before they retired, the men of Sodom, young and old, surrounded Lot's house. They demanded that Lot bring out his guests so they could abuse them. Lot, distressed by their wicked intentions, stepped outside and pleaded with them to refrain from such evil. He even offered his 2 daughters in place of the men, hoping to protect his guests from harm, but the mob was relentless and surged forward to break down the door. At that moment, the angels reached out, pulled Lot inside, and struck the men outside with blindness, so they could not find the door. The angels then warned Lot of the impending destruction of Sodom. They urged him to gather his family and flee the city at once. Lot tried to convince his future sons-in-law to leave, but they thought he was joking. As dawn approached, the angels took Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand and led them out of the city, urging them to flee for their lives and not look back. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away, the angels commanded. Lot, fearing he would not make it to the mountains, begged to flee to a small nearby town called Zoar instead. The angels agreed, sparing Zoar from destruction for Lot's sake. As Lot and his family fled, the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah, obliterating the cities, the entire plain, and all the inhabitants, as well as the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife, disobeying the angelic command, looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. Thus, God destroyed the cities of the plain but remembered Abraham and brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. The tale of Sodom and Gomorrah is a stark reminder of divine justice and mercy. Though the cities were steeped in sin, the Lord showed his willingness to spare them for the sake of even a few righteous individuals. The intercession of Abraham and the deliverance of Lot highlight the themes of faith, righteousness, and the importance of heeding God's warnings. In the aftermath of this cataclysm, Lot and his daughters settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. There, his daughters, fearing they were the last humans on earth and desperate to preserve their family line, made a grievous decision. They got their father drunk and conceived children by him, giving rise to the Moabites and Ammonites, tribes that would later play significant roles in the history of Israel. Thus ends the tale of Sodom and Gomorrah, a narrative that has echoed through the ages, serving as a solemn warning and a testament to the complexity of human nature, divine judgment, and the enduring hope of redemption. As we come to the end of this powerful story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we hope it has given you insight into the themes of divine justice, mercy, and the importance of righteousness. Abraham was promised by God that his descendants would become a great nation. Abraham is now old, and he wants to ensure that his son, Isaac, marries a woman who will help continue God's promise. Abraham is living in Canaan, a land with many people who do not follow God. He doesn't want Isaac to marry a local Canaanite woman because he wants his son to stay true to their faith and heritage. So, Abraham decides to send his most trusted servant on a mission to find a wife for Isaac from his own relatives back in Mesopotamia. Abraham understands the importance of ensuring that Isaac's wife shares their faith and values. He knows that marrying someone from their own people will help preserve the cultural and religious traditions that are vital to their identity. This decision is not just about finding a wife for Isaac, it's about securing the future of a nation that God has promised to bless through Abraham's descendants. Abraham calls his servant and gives him clear instructions. He makes the servant swear an oath that he will not take a wife for Isaac from the Canaanites but will go to Abraham's homeland and find a wife from his own family. The servant is concerned about whether the woman will be willing to come back with him to Canaan. Abraham reassures him, saying that God will send an angel before him to make the mission successful. This moment highlights Abraham's unwavering faith in God's promises. Despite his old age and the uncertainty of the journey, Abraham believes that God will provide a wife for Isaac. His faith is a testament to his deep trust in God's plan. The servant, too, shows his loyalty and dedication by agreeing to take on this important mission, even though it involves a long and uncertain journey. So, the servant sets out on his journey with 10 camels and many gifts. The gifts are significant because they demonstrate Abraham's wealth and the seriousness of the marriage proposal. They also serve as a token of goodwill and respect towards the family of the potential bride. After a long journey, the servant arrives at the town of Nahor. He stops at a well outside the town, a common gathering place where women come to draw water. Here, the servant prays to God, asking for success in his mission. He prays a specific prayer. He asks that the young woman who offers him a drink and also offers to water his camels will be the one chosen by God for Isaac. This prayer is a powerful moment in the story. It shows the servant's reliance on God for guidance. He doesn't want to rely on his own judgment or instincts but seeks a clear sign from God. The specificity of his prayer also highlights his faith, as he trusts that God will respond in a precise and unmistakable way. Before the servant finishes his prayer, a young woman named Rebecca comes to the well. She is very beautiful and a virgin. She fills her jar with water, and the servant runs to meet her. He asks her for a drink, and she quickly lowers her jar and gives him a drink. Then, she offers to draw water for his camels as well. This is a huge task because camels can drink a lot of water, but Rebecca eagerly does it. Rebecca's actions reveal her character. She is kind, generous, and hardworking. Offering water to a stranger and then volunteering to draw water for 10 camels shows her willingness to go above and beyond to help others. This moment fulfills the servant's prayer exactly, confirming that Rebecca is the one chosen by God for Isaac. The servant watches in amazement. This is exactly the sign he prayed for. After the camels have finished drinking, the servant gives Rebecca a gold nose ring and 2 gold bracelets. These gifts are not only a sign of his gratitude but also serve as a bridal gift, signifying her selection as a bride for Isaac. Rebecca runs to tell her family about the stranger and the gifts. Her brother Laban comes out to meet the servant and invites him to their home. The servant is welcomed warmly, and after the camels are cared for, he tells them about his mission and how God has answered his prayer. He explains how he prayed for a sign and how Rebecca fulfilled that sign perfectly. Bethuel and Laban recognize that this is from God and agree to give Rebecca to Isaac in marriage. Their willingness to see God's hand in the events and to honor the servant's mission is a testament to their faith. They understand the significance of this union and are ready to support it. The next morning, the servant wants to return to his master, but Rebekah's family asks for her to stay a little longer. They decide to ask Rebekah, and she agrees to go immediately. This decision shows Rebekah's courage and willingness to follow God's plan, even though it means leaving her family and everything she knows. Rebekah's family blesses her, wishing her many descendants. She and her maidservants mount the camels and follow the servant back to Canaan. It's a journey filled with excitement and anticipation as Rebekah leaves her home and family to start a new life with Isaac. The blessing given by her family is significant. They wish her to be the mother of thousands of 10,000s, echoing the promise God made to Abraham about his descendants. This blessing reinforces the belief that Rebekah's marriage to Isaac is part of God's larger plan. Meanwhile, Isaac is in the field meditating. When he looks up, he sees the camels approaching. Rebekah also looks up and sees Isaac. She asks the servant who the man is, and he tells her it is his master. Rebekah covers herself with a veil, a sign of modesty and respect. The moment Isaac and Rebekah see each other for the first time is a beautiful culmination of the servant's mission. When she saw Isaac, she covered her face with a veil. It's a moment filled with anticipation and fulfillment. The veil symbolizes Rebekah's modesty and her readiness to become Isaac's wife. The servant tells Isaac everything that happened. Isaac brings Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and she becomes his wife. He loves her deeply, and she brings him great comfort after the death of his mother. Isaac's love for Rebekah is immediate and profound. Their marriage is not just a union of two individuals but a continuation of God's promise to Abraham. Rebekah's presence brings Isaac comfort and joy, healing the sorrow he felt after his mother's death. Lessons from the story. 1. Faith in God's plan. One of the central themes of the story is faith. Abraham's faith in God's promise leads him to send his servant on this mission. The servant's faith in God's guidance leads him to pray for a specific sign. Rebekah's faith in God's plan leads her to leave her home and family to marry Isaac. This story teaches us the importance of trusting God's plan, even when the path is uncertain. Abraham, the servant, and Rebekah all show remarkable faith in different ways. They trust that God is guiding their steps and working for their good. 2. The power of prayer. The servant's prayer is a powerful example of how we can seek God's guidance in our lives. He prays specifically and confidently, trusting that God will answer. When God does answer his prayer in a clear and direct way, it strengthens his faith even more. This encourages us to pray with faith and specificity, trusting that God hears us and will respond according to his will. The servant's prayer also shows the importance of seeking God's guidance in important decisions. 3. Kindness and hospitality. Rebekah's actions at the well demonstrate the virtues of kindness and hospitality. Her willingness to help a stranger and go the extra mile in watering his camels reflects a generous and caring heart. These qualities make her a fitting bride for Isaac, as they align with the values of Abraham's family. We can learn from Rebekah's example to be kind and generous to others, even when it requires extra effort. Acts of kindness and hospitality not only help those in need, but also reflect the love and character of God. 4. God's providence. Throughout the story, we see God's providence at work. From Abraham's decision to send his servant, to the servant's prayer, to Rebekah's arrival at the well, every detail is orchestrated by God. This demonstrates that God is intimately involved in our lives and works through our circumstances to fulfill his purposes. This story reminds us that God is always at work, even when we cannot see it. He guides our steps and brings about his will in ways we may not expect. Trusting in God's providence gives us peace and confidence as we navigate life's challenges. 5. Obedience and willingness. The obedience and willingness of all the characters in this story are notable. Abraham is obedient to God's call to find a wife for Isaac. The servant is obedient to Abraham's instructions and God's guidance. Rebekah is willing to leave her family and go to a new land to marry Isaac. Their obedience and willingness to follow God's plan result in blessings for them and future generations. This teaches us the importance of being obedient to God's leading in our lives. When we are willing to follow Him, even when it requires sacrifice, we open ourselves to His blessings and purposes. 6. The importance of family and heritage. Abraham's desire for Isaac to marry within his own family highlights the importance of maintaining their heritage and faith. This decision ensures that Isaac's descendants will continue to follow God's ways and uphold the values that Abraham's family holds dear. In our own lives, it is important to honor and preserve the positive aspects of our heritage and family values. This can help us maintain a strong identity and faith, which we can pass on to future generations. The story of Isaac and Rebekah is more than just a love story. It's a testimony of God's faithfulness and the power of prayer. Abraham's faith, the servant's prayer, Rebekah's willingness, and Isaac's love all come together to fulfill God's plan and purpose. This story reminds us that God is deeply involved in our lives. He cares about the details and guides us when we seek Him. It also shows the importance of prayer, faith, and obedience.
In the ancient land of Canaan, there lived a man named Judah, the son of Jacob. His story, as told in the book of Genesis, is one of betrayal, redemption, and unexpected grace. But within his tale lies another, often overshadowed by the grandeur of his own narrative, the story of Tamar, a woman whose courage and resilience would leave an indelible mark on the lineage of Israel. Judah had wed a Canaanite woman, whose name was never recorded in the annals of history. Together, they bore 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. As sun was setting over the hills of Hebron, Judah, the 4th son of Jacob, returned to his family's encampment. He was a man of wealth and stature, respected among his kin. Yet, for all his blessings, there was a void in his heart. His firstborn son, had been taken by the Lord for his wickedness, leaving Judah's line vulnerable. To ensure his lineage continued, Judah arranged for his second son, Onan, to marry Er's widow, Tamar, in accordance with the custom of Levirate marriage. But Onan, fearing he would lose his inheritance, spilled his seed upon the ground, denying Tamar the child she was owed. With the death of Onan, Judah grew wary. He could not afford to lose his last remaining son, Shelah. So he sent Tamar back to her father's house, promising her Shelah's hand in marriage once he was of age. But the years passed, and Shelah remained unmarried, and Tamar's hope began to wane. Tamar watched as her hopes faded like the dying embers of a fire. She had been promised a future, a family, but instead found herself abandoned, cast aside by those who should have protected her. Desperation gnawed at her soul, driving her to devise a plan born of desperation. Disguising herself as a veiled prostitute, Tamar positioned herself by the roadside, where Judah would pass on his way to shear his sheep. As he approached, she lured him with promises of pleasure, and Judah, consumed by desire, lay with her, unaware of her true identity. Leaving behind his signet ring, cord, and staff as payment, Judah departed, ignorant of the consequences his actions would bring. But Tamar, clutching the tokens of their encounter, knew that her moment of reckoning had come. Months passed, and Tamar's womb swelled with child. News of her pregnancy reached Judah, who, outraged by her perceived infidelity, demanded her punishment. But as he prepared to cast her out, Tamar presented the evidence of their encounter, the signet ring, cord, and staff. Realization dawned upon Judah as the truth unfolded before him. He had wronged Tamar, denying her the justice she deserved. With humility, he confessed his sins, acknowledging the righteousness of Tamar's actions. "She is more righteous than I," Judah declared, his voice heavy with shame. "For I withheld from her the son she was owed." In that moment, Tamar's courage and cunning were recognized, and she stood vindicated in the eyes of her people. But more than that, she had secured her place in the lineage of Israel, for the child she carried would be the ancestor of kings. As Tamar's time drew near, she gave birth to twin sons. But the birth was not without its complications. As the first child emerged, a scarlet thread tied around his wrist, he suddenly withdrew, and his brother, Zerah, was born first. This act of unexpected reversal would foreshadow the future of the twins and the line of Judah. Perez and Zerah would go on to become mighty men in Israel. Through Perez, the line of Judah would endure, culminating in the birth of David, the greatest king of Israel, and ultimately, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. The story of Tamar and Judah, intertwined with the birth of Perez and Zerah, would be retold for centuries to come, a testament to the enduring power of faith, forgiveness, and redemption. In their union, two souls scarred by deceit and betrayal found healing and grace, proving that even in the darkest of times, God's providence always prevails.
The story of how Jacob plotted with his mother to trick Esau takes place in the household of Isaac and Rebekah, the parents of both Esau and Jacob. Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, was married to Rebekah, and they had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau, the older of the two, was a skilled hunter and his father's favorite. Jacob, on the other hand, was quiet and stayed near the tents, and was his mother's favorite. As Isaac grew old and his eyesight began to fail, he decided it was time to bestow his blessing upon his eldest son, Esau. In ancient times, a father's blessing was not just a simple farewell but a significant event that included the transfer of leadership, inheritance rights, and divine favor. The blessing was traditionally given to the firstborn son, which in this case, was Esau. Isaac called Esau to him and asked him to go out into the fields to hunt game and prepare a meal for him. After eating, Isaac promised to give Esau his blessing. This request set the stage for the unfolding drama, as Rebekah overheard the conversation between Isaac and Esau. Rebekah had her own plan. She favored Jacob and wanted him to receive the blessing instead of Esau. She devised a plan to deceive her husband, Isaac, into blessing Jacob. Rebekah instructed Jacob to fetch 2 young goats from their flock so she could prepare a dish just the way Isaac liked it. Then, she planned to have Jacob present it to his father, pretending to be Esau. Jacob was initially hesitant. He was concerned that his father would recognize him and curse him instead of blessing him. Esau was hairy, while Jacob's skin was smooth. Rebekah assured Jacob that if there were any curse, it would fall upon her instead. She dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes and covered his hands and neck with goat skins to mimic Esau's hairy skin. With his mother's encouragement and preparation, Jacob went to his father. Isaac was immediately suspicious because the voice he heard was Jacob's, not Esau's. When Isaac asked how he managed to find the game so quickly, Jacob lied, claiming that God had granted him success. Isaac asked Jacob to come closer so he could touch him and be sure it was Esau. Feeling the goat skins, Isaac was convinced by the feel of Jacob's hands, but still doubtful, he asked, "Are you really my son Esau?" Jacob lied again, insisting that he was Esau. After eating the meal prepared by Rebekah, Isaac blessed Jacob, passing on God's promise given to Abraham. He declared that Jacob would be the lord over his brothers and that nations would serve him. Just as Jacob left his father's presence, Esau returned from his hunt and prepared a meal for Isaac. When Esau entered Isaac's tent, he presented the food and asked for his father's blessing. Isaac trembled violently upon realizing the deception. He confirmed that he had already given the blessing to Jacob, and it would stand. Esau was heartbroken and begged his father for any remaining blessing. Isaac gave Esau a secondary blessing, which foretold a difficult life, living away from the richness of the earth and serving his brother. Esau's anguish turned into a deep-seated hatred for Jacob, and he resolved to kill his brother after their father's death. Rebekah learned of Esau's plan to kill Jacob and warned him to flee to her brother Laban's house in Haran until Esau's anger subsided. She convinced Isaac to send Jacob away by expressing her concern about Jacob marrying a local Canaanite woman, which was displeasing to her. This story is a vivid illustration of how deception and favoritism can fracture family relationships. Each character's actions were driven by their desires and fears, leading to long-term consequences. Isaac, his favoritism towards Esau and determination to bless him despite the prophecy given to Rebekah during her pregnancy, that the older would serve the younger, set the stage for the deception. Rebekah, her favoritism towards Jacob and willingness to deceive her husband demonstrated a lack of trust in God's plan, relying instead on her cunning to achieve her goals. Jacob, though initially hesitant, his compliance in the deception marked the beginning of a life characterized by conflict and struggle. Jacob's actions, driven by his desire for the blessing, led to years of estrangement from his family. Esau, his impulsive nature and previous decision to sell his birthright for a meal showed a lack of appreciation for his privileges. However, the loss of his father's blessing ignited a fierce resentment and desire for revenge. The story of Jacob and Esau offers several timeless lessons. 1. The consequences of deception. The immediate gain from deception often leads to long-term pain and conflict. Jacob's deception secured him the blessing but resulted in his exile and a strained relationship with his brother. 2. The dangers of favoritism. Favoritism within families can lead to division and conflict. Isaac and Rebekah's preferential treatment of their sons sowed seeds of discord and rivalry. 3. Trusting God's plan. Rebekah's intervention showed a lack of faith in God's promise that the older would serve the younger. Taking matters into our own hands rather than trusting in God's timing and methods can lead to unintended consequences. 4. Repentance and reconciliation. Although the immediate aftermath of the deception was conflict, Jacob and Esau eventually reconciled years later. This story reminds us that healing and forgiveness are possible, even after deep wounds. After fleeing from Esau, Jacob embarked on a journey that would shape his character and destiny. His time with Laban, his uncle, was filled with challenges and lessons. Jacob experienced deception himself when Laban tricked him into marrying Leah before Rachel, the woman he loved. Through these experiences, Jacob learned humility, perseverance, and reliance on God. Despite the deception and human failings, God's promise to Abraham was fulfilled through Jacob. He became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, and through his lineage, the nation of Israel emerged. This story is a testament to God's sovereignty and ability to work through imperfect people to accomplish his purposes. The story of Jacob and Esau is a powerful narrative about family, faith, and the consequences of our choices. It challenges us to reflect on our own lives and relationships. Are we trusting God's plan, or are we taking matters into our own hands? Are we showing favoritism that could harm our family dynamics? Are we willing to seek forgiveness and reconciliation? In the end, the story reminds us that God can use even our mistakes to fulfill his greater purpose. The story of Rachel and Leah is a tale of love, envy, and God's intervention in human affairs. Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, fled to his uncle Laban's house to escape his brother Esau's wrath. Upon arrival, he fell in love with Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. Jacob agreed to work for 7 years to marry Rachel. However, on the wedding night, Laban deceived Jacob by giving him Leah, his older daughter, instead. When Jacob discovered the deception, Laban justified his actions by citing the custom of marrying off the elder daughter first. Jacob then agreed to work another 7 years to marry Rachel as well. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive. Leah's fertility was God's response to her being unloved by Jacob. Leah gave birth to 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Each name reflected her hopes and struggles for Jacob's affection. Reuben, the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. Simeon, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. Levi, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Judah, this time I will praise the Lord. Despite her hopes, Leah remained unloved, and her situation fueled Rachel's envy. Rachel's inability to conceive caused her great distress. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I'll die." Rachel's desperation highlights the intense pressure women in biblical times faced to bear children, which was often seen as a measure of their worth and status. Jacob, feeling frustrated by Rachel's demands, responded, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" His reply underscores the belief that God controls fertility. In her desperation, Rachel gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate. This practice, though strange by modern standards, was customary at the time. Bilhah bore Jacob 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Rachel considered these children her own and saw them as a sign of her victory over Leah. Dan, "God has vindicated me, he has listened to my plea and given me a son." Naphtali, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." Rachel's joy was mixed with her continued rivalry with Leah. Not to be outdone, Leah gave her maid Zilpah to Jacob, who bore 2 more sons, Gad and Asher. Gad, "What good fortune!" Asher, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." These actions show the lengths to which both sisters went to secure their place in the family through childbearing. One of the more peculiar episodes in this narrative involves mandrakes, a plant believed to enhance fertility. Reuben, Leah's son, found some mandrakes and brought them to his mother. Rachel asked Leah for some of the mandrakes, and Leah's response was bitter. "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Rachel then made a deal with Leah. Jacob would sleep with Leah that night in exchange for the mandrakes. Leah agreed, and that night she conceived another son, Issachar. Later, Leah bore another son, Zebulun, and a daughter, Dinah. Issachar, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." Zebulun, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I have borne him 6 sons." Finally, says, "Then God remembered Rachel, he listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, 'God has taken away my disgrace.' She named him Joseph, and said, 'May the Lord add to me another son.'" Rachel's son, Joseph, would later become a key figure in the history of Israel. Her plea for another son was fulfilled with the birth of Benjamin, though Rachel died during childbirth. The story of Rachel and Leah offers several important lessons. 1. The dangers of envy. Rachel's envy of Leah caused her immense pain and led to actions that further complicated their relationship. Envy can lead to bitterness and destructive behavior. 2. God's timing. Both Rachel and Leah experienced God's intervention in their own time. Leah, though unloved, was blessed with many children early on. Rachel, after a long period of waiting, was eventually blessed with Joseph and Benjamin. 3. The value of patience and faith. Both women had to learn patience and rely on their faith. God's plan unfolded in ways they couldn't foresee, reminding us that patience and trust in divine timing are crucial. 4. The complexity of human relationships. The story highlights the complexity and difficulty of family relationships, especially when favoritism and rivalry are involved. It encourages empathy and understanding among family members. The narrative of Rachel and Leah is a poignant reminder of the human tendency toward envy and the struggles that come with it. It also shows how divine providence works in mysterious ways, often beyond our understanding. In a world where justice often feels elusive, how can we navigate the fine line between seeking retribution and promoting peace and godly wisdom? One such narrative is that of Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah. This story portrays a series of events that not only shed light on ancient cultural norms but also provoke modern readers to contemplate issues of justice, vengeance, and the complexities of human relationships. The story opens with the account of Dinah's encounter with Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, a prince of the land. This meeting ultimately leads to a grave injustice perpetrated against Dinah, as Shechem violates her body. The subsequent events unfold with a mixture of reactions from Dinah's family, particularly her brothers Simeon and Levi, who take matters into their own hands. The narrative presents a stark picture of ancient patriarchal society, where a woman's honor and purity were deeply intertwined with familial reputation and social status. Dinah's violation not only affects her personally but also casts a shadow over her family, igniting feelings of shame, anger, and a desire for retribution. Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, react vehemently to the dishonor brought upon their sister. They cunningly devise a plan to avenge Dinah's defilement, masquerading their intentions with deceit. Under the guise of forging a peaceful alliance with Shechem's family, they propose a treaty that includes intermarriage between the two clans. However, their true motive becomes apparent when they exploit Shechem's vulnerability after he falls in love with Dinah and convinces him and his entire city to undergo circumcision. In a shocking turn of events, while the men of Shechem City are still recovering from the painful procedure, Simeon and Levi launch a brutal attack, slaughtering them all. Their actions, though ostensibly motivated by a desire to defend their sister's honor, raise ethical questions about the proportionality of their response and the legitimacy of seeking justice through violence. The story of Dinah raises complex moral issues that continue to resonate today. On one hand, it highlights the importance of protecting the vulnerable and standing up against injustice. Dinah's violation serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for women's rights and the prevalence of sexual violence in society. It calls for a collective commitment to creating a culture of respect, consent, and accountability. On the other hand, the actions of Simeon and Levi provoke discomfort and moral ambiguity. While their desire to seek justice for their sister is understandable, their method of retaliation raises troubling questions about the ethics of revenge and the cycle of violence. Moreover, the aftermath of Simeon and Levi's actions further complicates the moral landscape. Jacob, their father, chastises them for bringing trouble upon their family and endangering their lives by inciting the wrath of neighboring tribes. His rebuke underscores the delicate balance between seeking justice and maintaining peace, highlighting the broader implications of individual actions on communal harmony. In reflecting on the story of Dinah, you may be prompted to wrestle with profound questions about morality, justice, and the complexities of human nature. How do we navigate the tension between seeking justice for the oppressed and avoiding the perpetuation of violence? What role does forgiveness and reconciliation play in the pursuit of healing and restoration? And how can we learn from the mistakes and triumphs of these ancient figures to inform our own ethical decision-making in contemporary society? Furthermore, the story of Dinah invites us to consider the role of leadership and accountability within families and communities. Jacob, though portrayed as a patriarchal figure, struggles to maintain authority and cohesion within his household in the wake of his son's actions. His inability to decisively address the repercussions of their vendetta underscores the challenges of maintaining moral integrity amidst familial strife and conflicting loyalties. Moreover, the narrative challenges traditional gender roles and power dynamics, offering glimpses of Dinah's agency and resilience in the face of adversity. While she remains a passive figure in much of the story, her presence serves as a catalyst for reflection on the treatment of women in biblical narratives and contemporary society. Her voice, though muted by the patriarchal structures of her time, echoes through the ages. In revisiting the tale of Dinah, we are confronted not only with the complexities of ancient morality but also with enduring questions about human nature, justice, and the pursuit of truth. As we delve deeper into the nuances of this ancient narrative, we are challenged to confront our own biases, prejudices, and preconceptions, and to strive towards a more compassionate and just society for all. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob and the first son of Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife. Because Rachel was barren for many years, Joseph's birth brought great joy to Jacob. Jacob's love for Joseph was so great that he made him a special coat of many colors, which made Joseph's older brothers very jealous. Joseph had two dreams that further fueled his brothers' jealousy. In the first dream, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field when suddenly Joseph's sheaf stood up and the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to it. In the second dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. Joseph's brothers and even his father were upset by these dreams, interpreting them to mean that Joseph thought he would one day rule over them. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were tending the flocks far from home. When they saw him coming, their jealousy turned to anger, and they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest brother, persuaded them not to kill Joseph but to throw him into a cistern instead, intending to rescue him later. However, while Reuben was away, the other brothers sold Joseph to a group of Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver. The traders took Joseph to Egypt. To cover up their actions, the brothers dipped Joseph's special coat in goat's blood and brought it back to their father, Jacob, who believed that a wild animal had killed Joseph. Jacob was heartbroken and mourned for his beloved son for many days. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Despite being a slave, Joseph earned Potiphar's trust and was put in charge of his entire household. The Lord was with Joseph, and everything he did prospered. However, Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph's handsome appearance and tried to seduce him. She said, "Lie with me," but Joseph refused her advances, stating that it would be a great sin against God and a betrayal of Potiphar's trust. Angered by his rejection, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of trying to assault her. Potiphar believed his wife and had Joseph thrown into prison. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. He found favor with the prison warden, who put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and the daily operations of the prison. One day, two of Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker, were thrown into the same prison. Both had troubling dreams and Joseph, with God's help, interpreted their dreams. The cupbearer's dream meant he would be restored to his position, while the baker's dream meant he would be executed. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and mention him to Pharaoh once he was released, but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. 2 years later, Pharaoh had two disturbing dreams that none of his wise men could interpret. The cupbearer then remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about him. Pharaoh summoned Joseph from prison, and with God's guidance, Joseph interpreted the dreams. He explained that Egypt would have 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to store surplus grain during the years of plenty to prepare for the coming famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him as the second in command over Egypt, giving him authority over the entire land. Joseph was given a new name, Zaphenath-Paneah, and married Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. They had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. As Joseph had predicted, after 7 years of abundance, the famine began. It affected not only Egypt but also the surrounding countries. People from all over came to Egypt to buy grain. Jacob, hearing that there was grain in Egypt, sent 10 of his sons to buy some. He kept Benjamin, his youngest son and Joseph's full brother, at home. When Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they did not recognize him, but he recognized them. Remembering his dreams, Joseph decided to test his brothers. He accused them of being spies and put them in prison for 3 days. Then he released all but Simeon and sent the rest back home with grain, instructing them to return with Benjamin to prove their honesty. The brothers returned to Canaan and told their father Jacob everything. Jacob was reluctant to let Benjamin go, but as the famine worsened, he finally agreed. The brothers went back to Egypt with Benjamin. This time, Joseph invited them to his house for a meal. He continued to test them by planting his silver cup in Benjamin's sack and accusing them of theft. When the cup was found, Judah offered to take Benjamin's place as a slave, demonstrating a change in heart and responsibility. Moved by Judah's plea and seeing the transformation in his brothers, Joseph could no longer keep his identity hidden. He revealed himself to his brothers, saying, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were terrified, but Joseph reassured them. He explained that God had sent him to Egypt ahead of them to save their lives during the famine. Joseph sent his brothers back to Canaan with gifts and an invitation for Jacob and the entire family to move to Egypt. Pharaoh supported this plan, offering Goshen, the best land in Egypt for them to settle. When Jacob learned that Joseph was alive, he was overjoyed. The entire family, including their livestock and possessions, made the journey to Egypt. God spoke to Jacob in a vision, reassuring him not to be afraid to go to Egypt, for God would make him into a great nation there. Joseph went out to meet his father in Goshen, and their reunion was emotional. Jacob said he could now die in peace, having seen that Joseph was alive. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. Before he died, he blessed his sons, giving each a prophetic message about their descendants. He also blessed Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, placing Ephraim, the younger, ahead of Manasseh. Jacob died at the age of 147. Joseph had his father's body embalmed and, with Pharaoh's permission, took him back to Canaan to be buried in the family tomb at Machpelah, as Jacob had requested. After Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers feared he might seek revenge for their past wrongs. They approached him, asking for forgiveness. Joseph wept and reassured them, saying, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." He promised to take care of them and their children. Joseph lived to be 110 years old, seeing his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Before he died, he reminded the Israelites of God's promise to bring them out of Egypt and back to the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He asked that his bones be taken with them when they left. The life of Joseph is a powerful story of faith, resilience, and divine providence. Despite the many trials he faced, Joseph remained faithful to God and trusted in his plan. His journey from a favored son to a slave, to a prisoner, and finally to a ruler in Egypt, shows how God can use even the most difficult circumstances for good. Joseph's story teaches us about forgiveness, the importance of dreams, and the power of God's guidance in our lives. If you have gained any insight from this story, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more biblical narratives and insights. Your engagement helps us bring more content to you.
Jesus came and conquered the enemy and has the gift of everlasting life to offer to all who will believe and receive it. If you've never asked Jesus into your heart, today is your opportunity to do so. In the book of Genesis, God created the heaven and the earth just by the utterance of his voice. The earth was perfect in all its ways. Everything that God made was very good, but God made man with a free will, a will to choose. So one faithful day man chose to believe and acted upon a lie that the enemy told him, and that very act caused man to plunge into eternal darkness and death. For God so loved the world, he refused to leave man in his state of sin, so one day he sent his Son Jesus Christ as the Savior Redeemer of mankind. He took the punishment for the sin of man upon the cross. All the way to Calvary he went for us so that today we can have eternal life through him. This eternal life is freely given to anyone who wishes to receive it. Just ask Jesus Christ to come and live inside your heart, your mind, and your thoughts, and he will save you from your sins and the impending wrath to come. If you reject this offer of salvation, then on that faithful day when all mankind shall be judged, you will be found wanting and a guilty verdict will be pronounced. Today is the day of salvation. Amen.